So I think we'll get started. Morning, everyone. Small request, except for Sudhakar. I request all of you to kindly keep your mics muted and your videos switched off. Morning and welcome to this celebration of Madras Day by the Madras Naturalist Society. The Madras Naturalist Society has been associated with the Madras Day and Madras Week celebration since its very inception. It's only last year and this year that we're doing something online, but otherwise it's always been on the field. We've had bird walks, we've had nature walk, we've had butterfly walks over the last few years. And we will hopefully next year we would all be able, I hope, to be able to step on into the real world and see what's there around us. There's a lot of what shall I say? Nature has really regenerated itself during this last few months, and it's very visible when we actually go out.
Breakfast.
And I wish we'll be able to do this more often in the coming days. Now, the Madras Naturalist Society was born in the year 1978, so we are about 43 years old. We are a nature conservation body rooted in Madras. We do a lot of conservation work. We associate ourselves with a lot of necessary, what shall I say, or we do whatever is necessary to ensure that that nature in Madras continues to remain. And while we are very active, we are not activists. We are presently engaged in three very interesting projects. We are actually doing a complete survey of the coast of Tamil Nadu. We are going back to recheck the presence of about 39 species of raptors within 100 kilometers radius, north, south and west of Chennai. It's very interesting. Doing all this as much as we can, although our abilities to go out in the field have been limited, we've still been able to achieve certain milestones which we had set for ourselves. So thank you all again for coming, for being with us this morning. K.V. Sudhakar is presently the president of the society. He's been the president for 2 years now. He is also the founder member of, he is one of the 16 who founded the Madras Naturalist Society in 1978. And he's the best person to talk about the naturalists of Madras, the early days. He is a professional, he is a practicing chartered accountant, an excellent photographer, a very good botanist, and of course, his knowledge of Avis is also exemplary. So, without much ado, I would now request K.V. Sudhakar to give us his talk on naturalists of Madras, the early days. Sudhakar.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Vijay, for a very flattering introduction. Very happy Madras Day. Madras is 382 years old today. I'm going to talk about the naturalists of Madras, the early days. Madras is 382 years old, and we are going almost 300 years back to recount one of the first naturalists of Madras city.
Sorry, just give us a minute, please.
So, as I said, Madras and its environs have always been a naturalist delight. Many persons have studied the flora and fauna of the place. From the days of the East India Company, natural historians have spread the knowledge of the natural wealth, our natural wealth, to the outside world. When I was given this topic, and then I was thinking about Madras naturalists, and then I found to my surprise that there was a post called Madras naturalist in the East India Company. It was variously called a Madras botanist or Madras naturalist. So that was a new thing for me. And many of the stalwart naturalists like Koenig and Roxburgh held the post of Madras naturalist in the East India Company. Many of these people came as doctors, administrators, and soldiers, or sometimes as spouses. We are going to talk about one of the spouses in today's talk, and they turned into Madras naturalists. So the focus on this talk is going to be about some of them who came to Madras city and then contributed to the natural history of Madras, thereby making Madras city known in and around the world. Edward Berkeley, actually he died in 1714. So that's almost 300 and odd, 400 years back. So East India Company surgeon and a pioneer naturalist. So one of the earliest of the modern accounts of Indian birds has been attributed to him. So the description and drawings of 22 birds found in and around Fort St. George was first painted and shared with the scientific world. Of course, you can see the birds in the panel, and it says Indian birds about Fort St. George. And then these names are the names which we may not recognize. For example, there are several birds called jays, and which can be identified with the modern names if you look at it closely. So what I wanted to say was, Edward Berkeley was the first to document bird species of Fort St. George. And probably this is one of the earliest bird lists to be sent from India. And this was published by John Ray as Avium Madras Patanaram. You will notice that there has been a small confusion about the name of Edward Berkeley, how it should be spelled. Now it's spelled as Berkeley. Berkeley is the correct spelling as accepted by everybody. Everybody is very familiar with this very pretty bird, Indian pitta. Surprisingly, the Indian pitta was first known to England only after an illustration was sent by Edward Berkeley to James Pettiware, who was in correspondence with James Berkeley, and it was given the name Pununki Pitta. Pitta, as you saw, as people who are familiar with Telugu know, is any small bird. So it was called Pununki Pitta in Telugu, and he called it the Madras jay in his paintings. Another two birds, very interestingly, Paradise flycatcher, which many of the early bird watchers of Madras described as very common. It was first reported by Bulkley and sent to Linnaeus, and Linnaeus was the person who gave it the Latin name. So that was another first for Madras city. And Indian pied wagtail again was sent by the drawings, was named by the drawings sent by Bulkley, called Motacilla Madras pratensis in Latin. And another first for Edward Bulkley and Madras city is the oldest herbarium specimens at the Royal Botanic Garden of Edinburgh are 52 specimens mainly collected from Fort St. George between 1700 and 1712. Among this was a specimen of sand-binding grass called Spinifex litorius, which is popularly known as Ravanan Misai, which you can still, I showed this because this is quite common still in the Madras coast. Among all the naturalists we are going to see, there are two people who died in Madras city. One of them was Edward Bulkley. Edward Bulkley's tomb still exists in Madras. It's just opposite the Madras Medical College hostel, I think, at the junction of Ponamali High Road and Evening Bazaar Road. There is an interesting story about this tomb. This tomb was not noticed by many people. In about 2000s, in the 2000s, early 2000s, an effort was made to locate this tombstone. It was found to be in good order, and then actually the access to see this tombstone is not free because it comes inside defense quarters. And what happened was, say about 10 years back, when a transformer was being shifted, this tombstone was damaged. Luckily, some doctors from Madras Medical College intervened and saved this tombstone. And there is a Latin inscription on the tombstone which says, "Do not wonder, O traveler, that it was in the garden where he refined his soul, that he wished his body to repose in the blessed hope of resurrection." What struck me very much was that here is a man from the British Isles who came to India, settled down in Fort St. George, and then he was buried in his own garden. And he got so attached to the place where he landed that he says it was in the garden where he refined his soul, he says. So he wishes his body to be buried there in the hope of resurrection. I found it quite moving. Next, we come to Lady Elizabeth Gwilym, another first. The paintings done by Lady Elizabeth Gwilym are now very famous. She came as a spouse. As I told you, many people came as administrators, military people and soldiers and doctors. She came as the spouse of Sir Henry Gwilym, a Madras Twisney Court judge, or it was called the Madras Supreme Court then. She was an English artist and a naturalist. She was active between 1801 and 1807 in Madras. And she's one of the other persons out of the 5 we are going to speak who died in Madras, and her tombstone lies in the St. Mary's Chapel in Fort St. George. So this is the, you can see the stone. She painted a series of watercolors of Indian birds, which was very, very accurate. And the first I was talking about for Madras City is that this was surprisingly produced about 20 years earlier than James Audubon published his famous celebrated The Birds of America. So these were birds drawn life size, and she complains about the paucity of paper and materials, painting materials and brushes, etc., which had to be imported those days. But this is an amazing reproduction of the birds, and many of these paintings are done with live birds. I think very few would have been done from skins. She came along with her sister, was unmarried, Mary Simons. She very humorously writes about her sister who is trying to paint the live birds. The live birds stare, kick, or peck, or do some wild trick which scares her out of her wits. And also she goes on to say sometimes these birds are so stressed, and she takes pity. Elizabeth takes pity on these birds, and she just sets it free. And there are other birds which are drawn from skins, and drawing from the skins brings a different set of problems to her, writes Mary Simons. They are rotting, they smell, and they are surrounded by 20 people trying to arrange the skins of the birds for her to paint. And after some time, a venerable Moor, she calls, that's a old Muslim gentleman, was employed to assist her in making the live birds pose for her. Another interesting thing is that the birds are drawn completely first, and then the backgrounds are probably painted later. So some of the paintings contain proper backgrounds. Some of the paintings lack background, probably due to the lack of materials, sketching materials, etc., which she always complains about in letters written to her sister and her mother back in England. I am very indebted to Dr. Subramanya, who was one of the first who brought this paintings of Lady Elizabeth Gwilym to my knowledge, and of course to the knowledge of people at large. Subramanya recounts the way he discovered the existence of these paintings. He had gone to McGill University in Canada sometime in '94 when he was looking through the computer catalog of the Blackerwood Library of Zoology in that university. He found that the library possessed a set of 121 drawings sent from Fort St. George. It made him sit up because the date attributed to these paintings were 1800. So that puts it 20 years before James Audubon published his the famous book of American birds. These are unique in the sense these are mostly drawn life size, as I said, and she was very good at painting things lifelike. She took a lot of care even about the feet of the birds, which you can see here, because it goes on to show how meticulous she was in painting these birds. So as you can see, they were 5 feet broad and 4 feet high, etc. High brass bound. These paintings are in watercolor. They had descriptive notes and measurements and color indicators, and sometimes they had an English or vernacular name or Telugu name in the reverse of the paintings, and they were all well preserved, and we would have lost it, but for the foresight of a man who was trying to get some old paintings for the Blackroot Library in McGill University. He was in 1924 visiting London. He found a complete set of these 121 paintings by Elizabeth Willey. Another thing is pointed out by the experts is that she is a person who was aware of this pterylography, that is a study of patterns of distribution of feathers. In this bird, you can see the care that she has taken in painting the pattern and layering the wings and tail feathers of the seated bird. Especially, I am very surprised at the amount of details even in the tail feathers. And her coloring of the feathers is also very delicately and very accurately rendered. So this Lady Elizabeth Willey is actually one of the pioneers of bird paintings in the whole of the world. And that is actually a project called Lady Elizabeth Willey Project, which is run by the McGill University of Canada. I think Dr. Suppu Subramania is involved in the project in a big capacity. And Dakshin Chitra in Madras City is also a partner of this Elizabeth Willey project of the McGill University of Canada. There are a lot of details. People have analyzed the paintings, and experts have actually appreciated the accuracy of the botanical paintings also, which have been rendered by Elizabeth Willey. We come to probably the most famous naturalist from Madras in the 19th century. This is P.C. Jerdon. Anybody who is a bird watcher or who is interested in natural history would be very familiar with this name, P.C. Jerdon. He was a British physician, zoologist, and botanist. He was a member of the Plinian Society, which was of which Charles Darwin was also a member. So he arrives in Madras in 1836, and he starts collecting specimens almost immediately afterwards. He has done collections in Eastern Ghats to start with, and all over India, in Burma also later. He was the person who described numerous species of birds in India, Of course, many of you are familiar with the most famous of bird which has been named after Jardan. That's the Jardan's courser. And of course, there are other birds like Jardan's baza, Jardan's leaf bird, Jardan's mushlark, Jardan's nightjar, Jardan's courser, and Jardan's babble and Jardan's bush chat. So you can imagine the amount of work T.C. Jordan has accomplished in one lifetime. There is one more first to T.C. Jordan's achievements, is that earlier to T.C. Jordan, the collections of birds and the bird skins were sent to the British Isles to get it identified. One of the packages of birds and bird skins sent to UK got moth-eaten on the way, and then it had become very difficult to identify these birds. So he started identifying the birds on his own, even in India, and he has been always importing the books and all the other reference materials from the British Isles. So he published a catalogue of the birds of the Indian Peninsula for the Madras Journal of Literature and Science. Now I must talk about the Madras Journal of Literature and Science. Many of you may be familiar with the Madras Literary Society, which has got a very hoary past. And this was the journal which was published by the Madras Literary Society, which even now exists at a place in Nungampakam, which used to be the Madras College those days. That's why it was called the College Road now. Madras Journal of Literature and Science, 1839-40. He published catalog of the birds of the Indian Peninsula, which almost doubled at one stroke the previous list, which was produced by Colonel W.H. Sykes. It contained 420 species, whereas Sykes had only about 200 and odd species. And another very important effort by T.C. Jordan is that he published Illustrations of Indian Ornithology in 1844, which included 50 illustrations. And the very important thing about this is he employed Indian artists, some of them from Trichinopoli. So T.C. Jordan made pencil sketches of birds. So he was a multifaceted personality, many of the naturalists that we are talking about today. And then under his guidance, the Indian artists were recruited to paint these birds. The Indian artists who were trained in making religious drawings were used to a different kind of painting, which was not natural. But T.C. Jordan guided these people to make very accurate renderings of the birds. For example, we are showing an image of Shahin falcon, which was done by one artist, Krishna Raju. That's how he spelled it. And this is the only painting which has got the name. So it is painted in 1842. And look at the quality of the painting, which is done in almost a century or 1.5 centuries earlier. But as most important publication, of course, is the Birds of India. which was published in 2 volumes, and the second volume was in 2 parts. So this contained about 1,008 species of birds, which was quite a big list for that time. So this the birds of India, which was one of the most important work which was done by T.C. Jordan during the course of his sojourn in India, was published in 2 what should I say, editions. One was quarto and the other was octavo. So these original editions of these Birds of India books are very rare. There are 2 sets of books which have been located in India. One from the Bombay National History Society, and the other from the Asiatic Society of Bombay. The important thing about this is Ashish Pitti of Indian Birds, who has written a very informative article on the nuances of these editions and the paintings of this important book, draws our attention to the fact that they are so exceedingly rare that only about 8 sets of books have passed through in the past 40 years during any of the leading sellers of these national history books. And the other books which are attributed, which was done by T.C. Jordan, is the Game, Birds and Wildfowl of India in 1864 and Mammals of India 1874. And the important thing is that he was instrumental in the birth of the fauna of British India, including Ceylon and Burma series. T.C. Jordan was what was he like as a man? See, he is supposed to be, some of the books talk about his rash nature. Very interestingly, he tried to catch, he was interested in birds, mammals, and anything in nature. So he tried to catch a cobra once and it bit him. And he was quick to draw out his penknife and slice off part of his finger to save himself from poisoning. And another incident quoted about T.C. Jordan, interestingly, is that he had 2 baby pythons as pets. And when they grew, and then when he was playing with the pythons, one of the birds constricted him so tightly that he had to cry for help, and somebody had to come and cut him loose. And of course, there is another story which says that he had cobras in his living room, which when it threatened his wife, he shot dead the cobra. So T.C. Jordan was a very interesting man. He later on, I believe, he had pet crocodiles also when he was in Egypt. So he seems to have been a very interesting personality, interested in all sorts of animals and birds. And come to Dr. Hu Kegon, another very important personality from Chennai city. He was among these five, he was the only one. He was born in Chennai, born in Madras. And he is known as the father of scientific forestry. He was the first conservator of forests of Madras Presidency. He was appointed to the East India Company as an assistant surgeon in the Madras Presidency. And interestingly, he was appointed as the acting professor of botany in Materia Medica at Madras Medical College. Those days, the surgeons had to have a knowledge of botany because they were prescribing medicines. And there is also a note saying that he had a museum of botanical specimens in Madras Medical College, and also a garden, which is not to be seen anymore, regrettably. He was an active member of the Madras Literary Society, and he had a key role in the management of Madras Horticultural Society Garden, MHSG, later known as Madras Agri-Horticultural Society Garden. He was also the secretary of the Madras Agri-Horticultural Society, and he published a catalog of the plants in the society's garden called the Hortus Madrasensis. So we owe our Madras
Mesh, you seem to have lost Sudhakar.
Yeah, we are trying to reach him, Raghu. I think Sudhakar got cut off. Kindly hold on. We are trying to reach him and restart at that point. Please give us a couple of minutes. We are on the job. Thank you.
I am back now.
in share screen போடணுமா இல்ல இதுக்கு இருக்கவே கரெக்ட்டா போகுது முஸ்லிம்ஸ்
You have to come on.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, we can.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we can see you, we can hear you, but I think you need to.
Yeah,
Yeah, come on.
Here?
You just need to share your screen again from where you stopped.
okay. Screen sharing.
Then
Yeah, I'll share. I'll go to.
Your screen sharing.
அவங்களுக்கு வரல அவங்களுக்கு தெரியல.
Meanwhile, everybody else, please mute yourselves. I think a lot of people unmuted.
Can
during
you
this
see,
break.
can you see the screen?
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay.
கட் பண்ணி திருப்பி பண்ணா நியூ ஷேர் போடலாமா?
Much, sir. Yeah, no problem. No problem. Yeah. Yeah, sure. No problem. I can see you and Mini, but I'm not able to see the screen. You have to share the screen. இந்த ரெண்டு பேரும் விசிபிளா இருக்கு. ஓகே. வந்துச்சு. Yeah. Setu, can you kindly switch off your video, Setu? Sudhakar is back. Yeah, Umesh bhai.
Yes, Vijay.
No, switch off your video. I think Sudhakar is coming back. We can see your screen, Sudhakar. You can start.
Sudhakar sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So, okay. So he was Dr. Hugh Cleghorn was an active member of the Madras Literary Society, and he had a key role in the management of Madras Horticultural Society Garden, which used to be called MHSG then, now known as Madras Horticultural Garden. He was also the secretary of the Madras Agri Horticultural Society, and he published a catalog of the plants in the later society's garden called the Madras Hortus Madras Patensis.
Recording in progress.
So Hugh Cleghorn in the speaker phone. Can you hear me now? Sorry, there seems to be some problem.
You're very clear. Please
Yeah.
go on.
Okay. So he was asked by the governor of Madras, Lord Harris, to organize a forest department for Madras and to start a systematic forest conservancy. And in 1856, he was appointed the conservator of forests. The importance of Dr. Hugh Cleghorn is that he was the first to recognize the importance of forests to the rainfall of the place, and also the climate of the place in which the forests are there. So he worked very hard to start the forest conservation in Madras Presidency. There is a curious thing in that there is a connection between forest conservation in India and the introduction of railways to India. So the Indian railways, when it was introduced by our colonial masters, they were very aggressive in extending the railway lines from the interiors to the ports, so that the merchandise could be exported. So Dr. Hugh Cleghorn made one of the first calculations of the use of actually timber or teakwood in the construction of railroads of India. He calculated it required about 1,760 sleeper logs for building 1 mile of railway line. That comes to a huge amount of timber which is required for the construction of railways. The sleeper logs life was only about 8 years or so, and so we are talking about 22,000 logs per year as the construction requirement of Indian railways and maintenance of these lines. So he was the first person that he recognized that the Indian forest could not afford to lose timber at such a high rate, and he introduced certain measures, and he convinced Lord Harris, the then governor of Madras, to organize a forest department for the Madras presidency. And also he was instrumental in studying the management of forests. Actually, the scientific forestry comes into its own after Dr. Hugh Cleghorn studies these timber requirements. There is another interesting thing. In 1860, he bans in Madras presidency Kumari cultivation, or sometimes called Kumri cultivation. Kumri cultivation was a very wasteful form of cultivation called the shifting cultivation, which people practiced in southern India, in even in Western Ghats. That was very wasteful, and he recognized that. I think even now it is practiced in some parts of the Northeast. So he was instrumental in getting this wasteful Kumari cultivation, the shifting cultivation, banned. So Brantis and Cleghorn were instrumental in passing the Indian Forest Act, which came into force in 1865. Another thing we should say about Indian Forest Act is that Indian Forest Act was one of the pioneering conservation of Forest Act in any part of the world. In fact, it is said that the American conservation ideas started from this Indian Forest Act. The fact that US started concentrating on the conservation of forests, and massive blocks of forests were conserved because of the influence of the Indian Forest Act, which was introduced, and then which came to the notice of the American conservationists. And again, another interesting thing is he was commissioned by the Madras Military Board to write a report on plans that could be used to stop sand blowing from Madras Beach between the Saluting Battery and the Santam Cathedral now. I couldn't find out what were the plans that he recommended. And another great achievement of Dr. Hugh Cleghorn was the person who recommended the formation of Madras avenues. Some people may have some argument against the choice of Dr. Hugh Cleghorn's choice of trees for Madras avenues. But what he says is he is suggesting tamarind trees to be planted as permanent avenues, as These are hardwood trees. They give good shade, and their fruits can be sold. So it is economically very prudent to grow tamarind trees as avenues, he says, and he recommends that it can be alternated with fast growing trees like banyan and other ficus trees, so that to form a temporary avenue at a fast pace. And then when the tamarind attains the full growth, he says the other trees can be cut off so that the tamarind avenue can be formed. Other trees which are recommended by him are Ficus tsiela. I think the name is now the experts may have some other name now. I think it's Ficus amplissima, and he recommends that Ficus benjamina and Ficus indica will not be suitable as avenues because of the hanging roots which will hinder the traffic. And of course, he is recommending the mast tree as a very handsome tree, and which is suitable for avenues. And he is recommending Casuarina muricata, which is suitable for narrow roads, especially near the sea. He says, and he gives the example of Ennur and Pulikai. Talking about the avenue trees, one Mr. R. Brown was the superintendent of the Madras Horticultural Society, and he was closely associated with Dr. Hugh Cleghorn. He has given a recommendation of a list of avenue trees. I will go through it quickly because it's difficult to read, I think, from this list of avenue trees which I have produced. One is Ficus indica, Ficus religiosa, Ficus tsiela, Ficus nitilda, Wateria latifolia, Tamarindus indica, Casuarina muricata, and Casuarina equisetifolia. And interestingly, he is recommending Poinciana regia, which is an exotic. But he says this tree does not attain a great size, but is very showy and should be planted in mixed avenues. And another thing he has suggested is Sterculia foetida. He says it's a good avenue tree, except for the objectionable odor from the flowers. And surprisingly, he is also recommending Bombax malabaricum, which I thought will be a very huge tree for avenue. But he recommends Bombax malabaricum, and of course, Thespesia populnea. So, Hugh Cleghorn was instrumental in getting Madras city making Madras city a tree of avenues. Actually, he had given a proposal to the government to plant avenue trees from Madras fort to Marmalang Bridge. And he estimated it required about 1,000 trees for that entire stretch. And he was prepared to supply the seedlings from the Madras Horticultural Society. So we should be thankful to Hugh Cleghorn for forming many of the avenues in Madras city. And we come lastly to Douglas Dever, who was born in 1875 and died in 1957. He was a barrister and a civil servant and an ornithologist. He was a prolific writer. He wrote several books about Indian birds. And also he wrote widely in newspapers, Madras Mail, Pioneer, Times of India, and the Civil and the Military Gazette, and Bird Notes. So he was quite a popular writer. What I like about him is his breezy style of writing, which is very interesting to read. And he was a sort of person who was opposed to the people who are study nature inside the museum. So this is a reproduction from his observations of the crows from his garden. And he says the ornithological world is peopled by two classes of human beings. There are those who study nature inside the museum with a microscope and scalpel, and there are those who live to observe birds in the open and study their habits. I think he preferred to be the latter, and he has got very interesting observations about the birds he had seen. Especially he writes about crows being very common, of course, being a pest and all that. The crows were so bold, he writes, that they entered the wards of the Madras Medical College Hospital. Now, what is Madras Medical College Hospital now? And they used to bother the patients. And there was a person who was called persons who were employed as crow boys, who were just employed to scare away the crows. Otherwise, the crows came to the bedside of the infirm patients and stole the food which was kept from them on the table. And then they started the practice of covering the food with metal lids. Yeah, and he also says the lighter lids which are used earlier were overthrown by these clever crows, and the food was taken. And he accuses the Madras, the museum ornithologists of needlessly multiplying new species and altering names, and too much attention being paid to local variations, which I think continues to this day. And many of the experts are still arguing about the need to split species and subspecies. So humorously about he is making a sly comment on those people who are needlessly multiplying the number of species by altering names and variations, and on the basis of some certain minor character differentiations, etc., by writing a very nice piece, which I will read out for you now. Now, close and patient observation during a long sojourn in Madras has convinced me that the sparrow in the southern presidency is quite 20%, showed me that there are other parts of India for is quite 20% more impudent than the sparrows in northern India. So he says the southern sparrows are more impudent. Hence, we have no option but to make a subspecies of him. Let us call him, he says, Passer domesticus indicus Madras pratensis. We may go even a step further, he says. The sparrows that hold a chorus along the ledges of the iron rafters of the Connemara Hotel are far more insulting and exasperating than any other sparrows I have set eyes upon. And he says, he proposes to call them Passer domesticus indicus Madras pratensis Connemara Hotel Bala, a name which I am sure will be received with acclamation both by sparrows and human beings. His article on the birds of a Madras garden in his book is a very interesting article. He talks about one of his friends, Jeffries, in the British Isles, who was a very keen observer of birds and who was a careful observer of birds, who says he has seen 26 species of birds in his downs, that's Wicks Downs, that's the place from where, farmland, from where he writes. He says every garden of tolerable size in Madras city is the abode of quite twice as many birds as those which visit a downland farm in England, he says. So every Madrasi Bangla will have at least 50 species of birds, he says. And he lists some of the sparrows which are commonly seen in the Madras bungalows. And these seem to be quite the same list that they get even now, excepting probably for the Brahmini miners. So with this, we come to the end of this short presentation. I have selected only a few people who I thought were very important from number one, they had a strong Madras connection. Number two, they had contributed a lot to the natural history of Madras. So with this, I leave you, and I hope that you will have the time to pursue even the earlier writings as well as the newer reports which are published in various journals now. And I wish to acknowledge, of course, many members of Madras Natural University from whom I have taken a lot of ideas. And of course, L. Shamal was very encouraging, and probably he is one of the experts in this kind of history. And S. Subramanya, V. Shantaram, and Kovan Sadasivam have all helped me in this talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sugakar. That was extremely interesting, and especially the last note where you have said that people enjoy changing names as and when. Yeah. So much so that when I go to the field, I only use the surnames. I've stopped using the first name. So I just say Babbler and Lark, and because the first names are constantly being changing.
I think they should learn from you.
Yeah. So wonderful. It was wonderful. So if any member of the audience, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat box. I will take them one by one. For the time being, I'll just open the chat box to see if they're in there. Of course, a lot of accolades for Sudhakar's talk, which is, of course, goes without saying, is well deserved. It was excellent, except for that small. Let me see if there is anything that I need to check. Are there any questions? Just check. There is a question. Any information regarding Gamble and his Madras work?
Yes, Gamble was well known. Any college student botanical student will refer to Gamble's botany. Yes, he was also. There are a lot of people who have done a lot of work on Madras natural history, and we have selected only a few. Of course, Gamble was one of them.
So was there anything special about Gamble's work, or he was just another?
No, he was the one who did the whole collection of Gamble's botany. Serves even now as the textbook, taxonomy textbook of the students even now, and he was based out of Madras.
Okay. And no, not able. Is there a place to explore botanical art and illustrations in Chennai?
I'm not very sure of it, but actually, interestingly, since you asked this question, the Madras Arts College, the person who was the principal of the Madras Arts College was consulted by T.C. Jordan for his paintings, and the local painter who was a teacher and also who was a student of the Madras Arts College, one Murugesan Mudaliar, was used by T.C. Jordan for his paintings. I think probably Madras Arts College might have some department which specializes in nature paintings.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that I think is quite likely. It's very likely that they would be there. Yeah. Let me just check if there are a couple of other questions also. Are there no Indian naturalists from these early days, or did they not publish?
Though the early, see, the records are very few of Indian naturalists. Supposing you go a little back from these times, maybe you have some Indian naturalists like from the Mughal days. Of course, Babar was a very interested naturalist, and he got a lot of birds and animals painted, including many of the animals that he had in his menagerie. And of course, Jehangir was very interested in natural history. So those were the type of people who were, of course, that was earlier than these colonial times. In colonial times, I have not found anybody who is, I mean, they come probably beginning of 20th century, maybe. People like Salim Ali and M. Krishnan, all those naturalists probably came a little bit later, I think.
Yeah.
I hope this is Ravi Chalam. Okay.
Yeah. Plus, there is this an additional thing. Is there any Indian naturalist based out of Madras?
I don't get it. An Indian national based out of Madras now or what?
No, I think from those days.
From those days, all these people whom I talked about had a collection of these 5. Two died in Madras city, and one was born in Madras, and the other 2 were employed in Fort St. George.
Indian naturalists. Anyway, Kumaran adds that there were Indian entomologists in the early 20th century.
Yeah, that's it. Okay.
So Shakti wants to know, maybe know the oldest surviving avenues with those suggestions of trees. I don't think.
I would think that since from Cleghorn's accounts, he has planted the trees, and he had got a budget allocated for planting trees of the whole of the Mount Road, I think. Because when he says Madras, from Madras to Marmalang Bridge, I would imagine that it was right from Fort St. George to Marmalang Bridge along the Mount Road. So I would think that if there was any surviving trees in the Mount Road somewhere, probably that will be as old as Cleghorn.
Yeah, I'm sure there are these old pictures of Madras which which are available. So perhaps if we can get a
there's an old picture of Mowbray's Road with avenue trees and all that. I think those are later, probably early 1900s or maybe late 1800s. Earlier than that, I don't know. I am not very sure, because Madras city probably would have been confined to the Fort St. George, and there were only garden houses in various places outside the Fort St. George.
Correct. So there's another question. Bangalore has a botanical garden. Why Madras never had a botanical garden?
But I think that Madras has Bangalore has botanical garden. Why Madras never had a botanical garden? Yeah, actually, I forgot to tell you that Dr. Hugh Cleghorn was the person who not only designed this Madras art, who took a lot of interest in. It was not established by him. Who took a lot of interest in Madras Natural History Society, Madras Agri-Horticultural Society #1, and the Lal Bagh was devised by him only. He designed Lal Bagh. Of course, it was established from Hyder Ali times. But Cleghorn is the person who designed the modern Lal Bagh. He has got a lot of role to play in and that. And Cleghorn also was instrumental in doing the Ooty Botanical Garden. Of course, it was managed by one Mike Ewer, a Scottish man. But Dr. Cleghorn also had a lot of say in the design of the Ooty Botanical Garden.
Yeah, but Ravi Chellam adds that this My Lady's Garden was perhaps a botanical garden.
Yes. My Lady's Garden is People's Park. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the People's Park.
Yeah, People's Park also gets mentioned in Hugh Cleghorn's works, because I think he also was instrumental in getting that done. I think My Lady's Garden might be one of the botanical gardens.
The last question, could you please elaborate a little more on forest conservation just around the Forest Act time? You know, you had mentioned that the Forest Act was passed around 1860, 1865. So
Yes.
what are the kind of forest conservation that was happening around that time?
Yeah, I think so. I think I will just tell you. See, when Cleggon was active in Madras city, nobody was thinking about conservation of forests. Actually, Cleggon, according to several sources, was probably convinced that a climate change was occurring and deforestation was affecting the hydraulics and probably the rainfall also. So he probably influenced the thinking of the government to pass this Forest Conservation Act. And also, as I told you, that he calculated the loss of timber trees. Actually, some people feel that though he was convinced of the importance of conservation of forests for preventing climate change and affecting the rainfall, he had to present the government in more in a manner in which the economy will be benefited. So that's why he says probably he took the view that the forest should be conserved. And also he calculated that the teak wood which was used for sleepers, and he talks of he got the cutting of teak wood, sandalwood, and the ironwood. I think all the three trees he prevented people from cutting. And then next he started imposing restrictions on cutting of aini trees and vangai trees and irul trees. These might have been useful for naval shipbuilding for the British Isles, and the government wanted to export this. So he worked with Brandeis to make this Indian Forest Act. This Indian Forest Act was passed in 1865, much before any Forest Preservation Act was passed in UK. So that was really a landmark act, which you can directly attribute to Dr. Hugh Cleggon. And the passing of this act also influenced environmental thinking in US, leading to a massive forest reservations in US. See, the people who are admiring the US forest policy, national parks, and they have a huge areas under protection, should think that the Indian Forest, passing of the Indian Forest Act in 1865 was instrumental in influencing the US thinking. And actually, I think he has, President, I think Roosevelt also has acknowledged somewhere the effect of Indian Forest Act and Dr. Hugh Cleggon somewhere. So, yes, coming back to the question, so the Indian Forest Act is the act which influenced this scientific plantation of teak trees in places like Nilambur and Topslip and other areas. So they had this how to plant teak saplings, how many years should it grow, and at what year it should be cut. All this and probably 20 years or so. So at what girth should it be removed? All this came into scientific forest management, and we must thank these acts for the teakwood forests that are still remaining in south of India. People who have visited Top Slip would have seen teakwood plantations, which was done probably because of the requirement of teakwood for the colonial government. And even the Nilambur tea, because Cleggon was also involved in studying the forests in Burma, where he found that the teakwood trees and other forests of Burma were being very denuded in a very quick manner, and it should not happen to India. So that was one of the thinking of probably Hugh Cleggon. So that way, the Indian Forest Act has had a lot of effect on the remaining forests of South India. Otherwise, I would have thought that at the pace at which the Indian Railways and the Indian government was utilizing these timber trees would have depleted completely the forests of India. England was a different act altogether, because though they had railways, they had a plentiful supply of coal and wood, where they were not burning wood in their trains. Also, they were making, they were using coal, and of course, it was much smaller scale, the railways in UK. I hope that answers your question.
So, Ravi Chellam observes that, shifting cultivation done ecologically can be ecologically sustainable if it is, the rotation cycles are long enough, and if it is ecologically done. Also observes that the Indian Forest Act, which was, I think, pioneered for to conserve and to save, as is now leading to ecological degradation as well as alienation of local communities. So from 1860 to what we see today, I think there's a completely
I know.
yeah.
This is a very contentious topic, because a lot of people have written about even this Kumari cultivation, that is the shifting cultivation, which is sustainable. And many people have also criticized Cleggon for this scientific forest management, because that led to large-scale planting of teakwood trees in places where there were many teak trees, or some good forests were cut, primary forests were cut to plant teakwood trees. So there is a lot of
I know. So this is
I am not very knowledgeable about this, but there are two different this thing. At that time, I think like in every problem, there are at that time probably that was forward thinking, and now that science has advanced so much that thinking of the so many concepts of conservation of forests have changed.
Yeah.
I
So
think.
anyway, everybody feels it's your talk was wonderful, and we're very grateful that you shared so much of knowledge with us. So everybody looking forward to a sequel on later development. So you stopped at 1957 or so. So so that was the last person. So Douglas Dever. So I think now everybody is looking now to, your talk from Dever onwards. So I think we will one of these days schedule a talk with you talking about naturalists from there on. I'm sure we'll have a lot of, you will have a lot of information on them too to share with us. But it was really wonderful and very, very grateful. And I think the 382nd birthday of Madras, which we are celebrating today, has been celebrated in a very rousing manner by your talk, Sudhakar. So thank you very, very much on behalf of Madras Naturalist Society, as well as on behalf of all of us who cherish being part of this great city called Madras. Thank you, and thank you all, friends, and have a great day, and please take good care of yourselves.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Sudhakar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Sudhakar. Wonderful.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed
Thank
every slide of yours.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. It's a fantastic finish. The schedule is a very good idea. Continuing that one is a very good idea.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
Padmaja,
you, thank you.
Padmaja suggested it. Yeah, so let's do it.
Very nice, very nice. Whoever
Thank you,
gave it-
Sudhakar. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.